Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. 3, 2, 1. All right, Bigfoot Society. We've got the privilege of talking to Steve today. Steve's an individual from Vancouver, Washington. He's a Bigfoot researcher out there. And I'm a big fan of Steve's YouTube channel, Steve Searches. I kind of ran into it, I believe, in one of the many Bigfoot Facebook groups I'm in, Sweet Home one. But Steve, it's a privilege to have you on the show today. How's it going, man?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
You know, your channel is so awesome because you can go into that Gifford Pinchot, Mount St. Helens area, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I go to a few places, other places here and there, but that's, as a general rule, that's pretty much where I operate, is on the south side of Mount St. Helens in the Gifford Pinchot.
That's awesome. You know, Steve, before we get headed too far, do you mind sharing with the listeners what it was that first got you into the Bigfoot subject and research to begin with?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I think probably like a lot of researchers, it was probably something that started when I was a kid. There was a movie that had come out when I was in grade school. It's called The Legend of Boggy Creek, and I think that kind of got a lot of people started. But then, of course, over the years, it was really just sort of like, it was just really, I guess, more of an interest, and it really only became a serious subject to me just maybe in this last few years, involved in missing persons, helping with missing persons cases back in about 2010. And I'm also a drafter by trade. In my first few years as a young drafter, I was a map maker, and that was sort of a skill that I had that later on led me into helping out with missing persons. Well, then I guess it must have been about 2012 or so. I was with a group and somebody had said, "Oh, we should get one of those drones." And I kind of thought about that for a while. And a few years ago, I had started purchasing drones because I started using those in map making. Well, anyhow, going back to it must have been about 2008, 2009, I had an experience up in Mount St. Helens, up by Ape Cave, where I was hiking on the trail. And there's a trail that goes from the main entrance to there's a smaller entrance, which is actually at the very end of Ape Cave, which of course is not actually a cave, it's a lava tube. And I was on that trail. It must have been about March or April. The snow was just clearing out up there, and I found this. It wasn't a clear cut. It was just sort of like this big open area where there was some bunch of lava rock and stuff. It's people that have been on that trail know where it's at. And I was standing out there one time, and it must have been about maybe 7, 8 in the morning, and I had been up there a lot of times, and there was something really different about it. And it was that there was no sound up there. I was just standing there, and all of the forest creatures just went quiet. So I'm standing there, and I was by myself, and I thought, wow, this is pretty weird. And I smelt something really kind of rancid. And sometimes people talk about how they get that feeling that they're being watched, and this was really that time. And I just kept thinking there's something behind that tree line. And I never really took the Sasquatch stuff that seriously before, up until that moment. So that kind of stuck with me for a few years, and I started going back up there to see if I could figure out what that was. And then then it must have been about maybe 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I had been contacted by some local researchers, and they had seen some of my maps, and they had asked if I would go and drone some areas to help them look for Bigfoot. There was a small Bigfoot group that was out of Woodland. And so I said, yeah, sure. And so when I started getting involved with that, then I just started going out then on my own. So I started Steve searches about a year ago. And that was something that I wanted to. Originally, I put it together to kind of keep track and showcase some of the work that I was doing with missing persons cases. In fact, there was a case that I was working in Boise a couple of years ago, and I had put this blog together to kind of to keep track of all of the mapping and stuff that we were doing on that. And it sort of, Steve Searches sort of just became more of a Bigfoot research project. And it's just kind of gone from there. It was about, I think it was spring of last year, then I had gotten in contact with Michelle with the Sweet Home Sasquatch Research Group. And her group and I we began collaborating last spring. So we've had quite a few outings, not only down in their area, but up in Mount St. Helens.
Listeners are aware Sweet Home is going to be down the Willamette National Forest down in Oregon. So you guys were going back and forth between the two areas, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I went down there. For a few of the functions that they had for the group. In fact, I think the first function that we had was a camp out with a bunch of us down there. That was like back in April. But then since then, they've had members that have come up here, and we've gone on outings in the area that I work. It's sort of a collaboration that we started. But yeah, we've had a couple of experiences up there through must have been in about June and July. We've heard things like rocks clacking early in the mornings. And I at one time had a creature that came into my camp and hung around my camp probably for beginning, must have been about early evening on into the morning the next day. And that ended up with it throwing limbs and stuff across the road right down from my camp. That was one experience that we had up there. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it.
Oh, wow. So that encounter happened in Gifford Pinchot then?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I have a main camp that I frequent. I call it the main camp because it's one I go to the most. It's up in sort of in an area just above Ape Cave. It's right about between that area between Ape Cave and Ape Valley. Is a lot of. I spent a lot of time up there last year. I probably will again this next year, especially because of that encounter.
So the time that you had something walking around your campsite, how close do you think they were getting to your tent at that time?
Oh, it came right up to the tent.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty weird. It must have been on a Friday. I had gone up there and I had spent the afternoon setting up. I had set some trail cams up, and then I think I must have knocked off at about, must have been 6:37 that night, and I went and I set camp up, and I was, after I'd set the camp up, I was sitting and working on some videos and stuff, and I heard what sounded like a tree fall, and I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. And how often are you out in the woods and just all of a sudden a tree falls? I didn't really think too much of it. In fact, I'd been texting Michelle with the Sweet Home group. I'd been texting her some photos of the camp and stuff, and I texted her and I told her, yeah, that's kind of something kind of weird that a tree fell, or at least that's what it sounded like. It sounded like it came. See, that camp has sort of like a little road that goes into it. It's not on the road, but you can see down the road probably 100 yards, and that's where it sounded like it came from. So anyhow, fast forward the clock. I woke up about, I think must have been about 1:30 in the morning, which is pretty common for me anyhow. And I don't know what woke me up, but I thought, well, heck, while I'm up, I might as well work on some video. I would take the laptop and work on videos and stuff. And so it must have been about an hour later. It was about 2:30. I heard something walking around in my camp. And it was kind of peculiar because the ground in this camp, it's kind of flat and it's packed, and it's always covered with needles and leaves and stuff from the fallout. But it didn't sound like, when you spend enough time out in the woods and you hear things walking around, it sounded like something that had, this is what caught me weird about it was it didn't sound like something that had hooves. It just sounded like somebody barefoot walking around, because you could just barely hear, like a foot pad coming onto the ground. And I thought, well, that's okay. So then I just kind of sat there and I thought, well, I'll listen to it for a little bit and see what it does. And it would take a few steps and it would stop, and it would take a few steps and stop. And then I got to thinking, I didn't think really at first about it being a Sasquatch. I was thinking more on the lines of, because I usually back my truck up to the camp and I put my tailgate down. I use that for a camp table, and I have these plastic tubs that I usually keep all my food in. And I remember I left the tailgate down, and I thought, well, maybe it might be a deer out there, or a porcupine or something getting into my. And then I thought, well, I probably should run it off. So I'm thinking about running it off. And then I hear this kind of crackling noise. And it dawned on me that the crackling noise that I was hearing was the cheap tarp that I always put my tent on to protect the bottom of it. So whatever it was stepping right on that few inches of tarp that was sticking out. And I thought, oh, wow, it's right up to the tent. So I just sat there and listened to it for maybe 15, 20 seconds. And so then I made that. And I thought, at that time, I was still thinking maybe it might have been a raccoon or something. But whatever it was had to have been pretty heavy to be stepping and making that crackling noise. So I made a hissing sound, like when you shoo off a cat. And then it was quiet. And then I yelled at it. I yelled, "Get!" And then it just stayed quiet. So I sat there for a little while, and then I just looked out there, and there was nothing out there. So whatever was left. So that was by that time, it was probably about 3:00 anyhow. So fast forward the clock again to must have been about maybe 6:30, 6:45. And I had woke up, and I decided that I was just going to go ahead and pack up camp. Anyhow, I was pulling out anyhow that day. But I wanted to check those trail cams really quick on my way out. So I was here. I was packing my camp, and I kept hearing what sounded like limbs snapping, like something breaking limbs. And I kept looking down the road because it was coming from that same spot where I thought I heard the tree fall. And by this time, it was starting to get kind of weird, and so I just kept packing up the camp. And then I heard it again. And then right about the time I had everything in the back, I heard it a third time. Like this time I had walked around the truck, and I was standing there, and I was looking down the road where that sound was coming from. And there was a big limb went flying across the road down there. And it was probably maybe 100 yards down. I went back there, actually. I went back there. It must have been that next weekend. I went back there with the video camera, and I did sort of a step-by-step. But I haven't finished to put that video out yet, but I probably will do that here in this next week or two. So I see this limb go flying across the road. And of course, obviously, I mean, what kind of an animal breaks limbs and throws them across the road? So I decided, well, maybe that would be a good time to get out of there, because I was packed up anyhow. So I got in my truck, and then I just kind of creeped down the road. And I was kind of nervous about it, because as I was going down the road, I mean, this little road, there's only one way in, one way out, and that's the road. So I was half expecting to get, like a long log or a limb or something like that on the truck. I had my GoPro going at the same time, but then nothing happened. So I got out, got to the end of the road. I went up the road to this place where this clear cut was, where I had set these game cams up. And I got out, and I thought, well, I'll check these game cams quick. And I was all the time I was still looking sort of like over my shoulder back to where I'd just come from. And as I was walking out to check those game cams, I could still hear it breaking limbs, but it was staying right inside of the tree line, but it was following where I was going. So I just decided that I'm gonna wrap this one up. So that was it must have been about mid-July.
Oh wow! So just this summer, just a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have any time to? It sounded like you started to pack up camp pretty quick. Did you have any time to look around and see if there were any tracks or anything weird like that inside camp?
Well, I went up there. Of course, I went up there. Must have been about 5 days later, but I go up there all the time, especially in the summer. I'm up there probably twice a week, at least every weekend. And I had gone up there, but see, it's kind of the way I need to put that video out because it explains a little bit better. But when you go in, a lot of these places in the Gifford Pinchot, when you go out and you're walking around in the woods in there, you're walking on layers and layers and layers of needles and such, and so you don't really get much for prints in most of these places there. I mean, things can be walking around. I mean, unless it's you can find prints a lot easier of things like deer and elk. Of course, obviously because they have hooves, but something with flat feet won't make much for prints up there. But so I went back, and I've come through that area where the limbs were being thrown around, and of course up there you can't. There's so many limbs laying around back there. You can tell one from another, but there were definitely freshly snapped limbs there in that area. But that was the same area. In fact, that was the same campsite that only a few weeks earlier, Michelle and a couple of the other members from the Sweet Home group, that was that same camp spot where we heard the rocks clacking. That was pretty weird too. It was Michelle and Sarah and Derek from the Sweet Home group. They had gone up there, and it was the morning after the first night up there. That camp is only a couple hundred yards from. There's a creek down there. It's kind of down a hill from where the camp is. And Michelle and I it must have been about 6 a.m, and we were up and we were just sitting there BS, and I was making coffee, and we kept hearing these rocks clacking. And she was telling me this funny story, and I don't remember what it was about, but this went on for probably 10 minutes. And then I asked her, do you hear rocks clacking together? And she was like, yeah. So we got up, and so we sat there, we listened to it for a minute or two, and then we kept hearing it. And this was coming from the creek area. And this creek, of course, is, like I said, it's downhill, so it's not within line of sight. And plus, you got noise from the water moving, so these rocks clacking together would have had to have been some pretty big rocks for us to hear it like that. So we got up and we walked over, and right about the time we got to the top of the hill to where you could kind of start to look down and see the creek, it stopped. And we hung around there for probably 20 minutes, walked up and down the trail there, but it never stood up again. So yeah, as I understand it, the only animal that really clacks rocks together like that I think they're orangutan, at least according to what I find online. But yeah, and that was the same campsite.
That's so extremely interesting that you would say that about orangutans, because more than a few of the accounts that I take, it's usually described with some features like an orangutan. Have you ever heard anything like that up where you're at in the Pacific Northwest, where what people are seeing is kind of has features like an orangutan, or is it something else completely different?
Well, I have heard a lot of I've heard a lot of people that have been up around here that have said the same thing. They heard rocks clacking. So that seems to be pretty common for this area. It seems to be pretty common for the Gifford Pinchot is rocks clacking. Other areas, I'm not really sure, but the kind of the gist that I get is I think that, and I'm just kind of going out on a limb because I don't really know, but it seems to me that different areas, the populations in different areas almost have maybe their own culture, or they have kind of similar habits. Because I've known, when you see these other groups that are in, like on the East Coast and the Midwest, and they do a lot of things like gifting stations and stuff, and people are saying that they like live with them and make friends with them and stuff, but the Mount Helens brand of Sasquatch, they seem to be kind of violent. I mean, there's these, it's like the stories of those gold miners that were up there in Ape Valley that ran out of the cabin. What was it? I think it was back in the 30s. And it seems like a lot of the interactions in around the Gifford Pinchot, they seem like the Squatch up there. They don't really seem to be big fans of humans.
So that's interesting. You're referring to the Ape Canyon attack of 1924, right?
Yeah, right.
Perfect. Yeah, about, 100 years. Well, no, we're past 100 years now because it's January. 101 years. Mm-hmm. It's 2025.
101 years, yeah. And of course, as the crow flies, where I operate, where my main camp is, as the crow flies, it's like maybe 5 miles from there.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's all in that area.
Now, are there any other things that you've heard about Gifford Pinchot that would make you think that potentially the Sasquatch that are in this area are violent besides the Ape Canyon account?
Well, I don't. I think for the most part, what comes to mind is really it's just a lot of the scuttlebutt that you see on social media. And when I share these accounts on, say, like when I share on Facebook, or the comments sometimes that I get on like on YouTube, I seem to get a lot of people that say, yeah, we were camped in such and such in 85 or 91 or whenever, and they had something similar happen with limbs breaking and stuff like that. So that's just really kind of the gist that I get of it.
It's interesting. Is there an area within the national forest, like a area known for within Bigfoot research, that you just won't really go to because of the history that's associated with it?
Well, some of it, I don't know if there's really any place that I wouldn't go, but some of it is less accessible, of course. I mean, there are some places that I really don't go, but it's not necessarily because of the Sasquatch in there. It would be because of the terrain or the weather, things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, there are. I have encountered a few people that have said that they used to hunt up there, but they won't go up there now. In fact, somebody was just commenting on a video I put out a couple of days ago about the area that I was up in Gifford Pinchot last weekend, and this one guy was saying that he hunted up in there for 40 years, and he just called it an interaction, but he said after the interaction, he said he won't go back there. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I had that experience back in July with the branches or the limbs being thrown, I didn't. I went back there, but I didn't camp again back there. I didn't camp again, and then, of course, pretty soon, it was part of that was because then hunting season came around the corner, and the hunters tend to take up the camping spots up there. But yeah, So I've encountered a few people that would say that they won't go back there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such an interesting area because you have, the area where you're focused on, but then you can go even further north. You can go to, I believe you'd consider Packwood as a part of that, potentially maybe south of Randall. That whole area seems to be pretty wild too, but I think that's a little bit out of your research area, right?
Yeah, well, I go up there. I go up there maybe a few times through the summer, but I haven't really researched too much up there because the whole idea behind where I was researching one area was the project that I started last year. Is what I was doing was I was setting up gifting stations back in there. I was setting up just food stations with the game cams. And what I was trying to do really is I was trying to get them used to me being up there. I would put peanut butter out, I put apples out, and I wanted them to get used to my scent up there. And then and so they would just I was trying to condition them to correlate me with food, or just so they correlate me with being a friendly, I guess. And so that was why I decided to stay with that same area. That was really the project that I was involved with last year, doing that. But yeah, those other areas where you go up over Windy Ridge and places like that, there's a lot of squatching to do up there. I might venture up there maybe a little bit more this year, a little higher up.
So you were
But
so you're saying the gifting area, that area where you had something walk around your tent, you were also doing a gifting area at that campsite too?
yeah, there was.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't really doing it at the site because I didn't want to camp where I was gifting. I wanted to kind of keep the two separate because I was afraid if I was camped there, they might not want to come around. So what I had a couple of different places down the road from there. There's a big clear cut that's nearby, and I was gifting in there. And then there's another spot down the road where it's heavily wooded, and I was gifting in there as well. Yeah, it was kind of weird too because when I first started it, when I first started the gifting, and it was also when I first started using game cams. And I have a video that I just put out a couple of days ago, and I kind of told the story really quick, but there was an area that it was nice. It was nice and open, so I could set the game cam up because the game cams I use are pretty sensitive. So if there's grass or if there's limbs moving, things like that, it'll just keep setting them off. So sometimes I'll go and I'll pull a card and there'll be 400 frames in there and there's nothing in there. It's because things moving. Well, anyhow, I found a really nice spot. And it was nice and open, and it was probably 50, 60 feet. And I took a bag of one of those Winco bags of Gala apples, the 3-pound bag, and a jar of peanut butter. And I set them all up in this area. And I went back about 4 or 5 days later. And of course, the food was gone. But I never got a single hit on that camera. I mean, there was no apples left. There's no peanut butter left. And they were everything was well within range of that camera. And it was just like something came in and got the food, and the camera didn't even see them. I mean, in fact, there were 5 frames on that card. 2 of them were my backside, me walking away the day I set the camera up, and then 3 of them were also of me when I was walking in to pull the card. But other than that, I never got one hit on the camera. And that's like maybe a mile down the road, I guess, from where the main site is.
Was the bag there at all?
No. Well, I didn't leave the bag. I didn't leave the bag there.
Okay. Okay.
But I left it. I mean, in those 3-pound bags of apples you get from Winco, there's probably a dozen apples in there. I put them all in different spots. Same thing with the peanut butter. I took a big jar of peanut butter down there, and I put like little piles here and there, probably 5 or 6 piles, with the whole jar. In this whole area, it was just like a big buffet. When I went back, it was all gone. And no hits on the camera.
That's really interesting. Do you ever go out and set up an area like that without game cams?
Oh yeah. There has been. I didn't when I first started doing it. I would set these gifting stations up like that. It's just that you'd go out there, and the food would be gone, but there was no way of telling what was taking the food. So that was why I started using the game cams. I wanted to see what was taking the food, and then of course it was kind of, and it's not that the cameras don't catch them, because I have hundreds and hundreds of photos on these cams of things like coyotes. Coyotes do tend to like apples for some reason, and I'll get other animals taking the food, but every once in a while I'll get food that was disappeared. But this one was weird. Was really weird because of all of the food out there. I mean, there was not a single frame.
I mean, if I was doing that kind of thing, I think that would drive me nuts. It would be like, okay, give me a track or something, guys. That's wild.
Yeah, right. But it's kind of something that I think when you get a little bit of practice, maybe you get a little bit better at it. I'm hoping that I'm hoping I have higher hopes for this year getting things in game cams, but I don't know. I mean, when food like that disappears and there's no hits on the cam, that it must be something is finding a way around the cams, or at least that's what it seems. But yeah, we'll see.
Absolutely. You put out a few videos around, actually just after the unfortunate situation with the two researchers that went out Christmas Eve, which I thought it was fascinating to see, because you drove up into, well, I guess it was the general area, correct?
Yeah, it was the area where they were at. I mean, it was the area they were at. I was actually up there that same day that they were up there. That was Christmas Eve. I would have been just a few miles west of where they were. But I did that. I put that video together, but mainly the reason I put that video together was because there are a lot of people, of course, on social media. There's always a lot of fluff, but there was a lot of people that didn't seem to understand how that could happen in that area. And to me, it's pretty easy to understand, just because I work up there. I know how easy it is to get turned around, and I know that once you get turned around up there in this time of year, I mean, the party's over. I was thinking about that too today, because I was up there traipsing around. I was up today up above Merrill Lake, and I had gone off, and I was on a trail, and I was maybe 5 minutes away from my truck, and I stopped for a second. I thought, gee, it was a good thing I was still on the trail, because you can tell where you were, and that's really all it takes up there. I mean, plus it starts, it gets dark at 4:30, 5 o'clock right now. And yeah, so the reason I did that video is sort of to kind of show people what the terrain is like up there. Because there were people that were kind of scratching their heads and saying things like, well, why didn't they just build a fire and this and that? And yeah, I wanted to dispel a lot of things like that, kind of show how easy it is to get messed up there. But yeah, so yeah, I was right up there in that area where they were.
I think it's fascinating how you showed that when you're down the valley out there, the weather is completely different. You drive up there, it changes in just seconds.
Right. I even saw there were people that lived right there in Camas and in Washougal that were saying, well, gee, they were saying, well, the weather was really mild, and they couldn't figure out how that could happen. Well, the weather, yeah, sure, the weather was mild if you're in Camas or in Washougal, or if you're in Vancouver, the city's down in the valley. But the minute you go up in the mountains, it's totally different. It's another world up there. And then, around here, that happens in a mile plus, right? Plus that area they were in, there's a small river that ran through there. So they would have had at least one water crossing. And I'm figuring that they may have gotten wet on the water crossing. And once that happens, I mean, even if a person could build a fire, which is, I mean, I can't really say it's impossible to build a fire in those areas, but it's pretty difficult because, it snows and it rains, and it snows and it rains up there, and everything's wet. There's not really things up there, especially right in that area. There's not really things up there to make fires wet. And of course, most people, when they're out and about and they're out hiking trails and stuff, by the time it dawns on them that they're in trouble, well, they're by that time they're already, hypothermia is already setting in. You know what I mean? They're already, their hands are numb, and And I don't know, I suppose maybe a person could just drive up there and maybe build a fire in 3-4 hours or something like that, whatever it would take to do, which seems pretty difficult. I don't think that somebody that by the time they were already suffering and figured out that they were in trouble, I don't think they would be able to do something like that. And of course, once it gets dark, it's over then. So I'm sure that's what happened, and it's more than plausible. It's for me, it's more than plausible.
Are there things that you make sure are on your person or in your bag when you go out to places like that in that type of weather situation?
Yeah, well, one thing that I do is I tend to operate with a pretty wide margin of safety. And what I mean by that is say if I'm out hiking, once things, it's a little bit different animal from when it's in the, say, if it's July or August or something like that. If you get turned around, you can usually stay in the night up there or something. But that's totally different in the wintertime. So in the wintertime, generally, I try to stay within line of sight of where my vehicle is. But another thing is that since I make maps, I am fairly decent at navigating. So I always will have my Army issue compass with me. But I have a little Garmin E-Trax that I normally will take with me. And that's a pretty good tool. But yeah, generally I just make sure that if there's a trail or something up there, I'll stick with the trail, because if you once you step off of the trail, you don't have a trail anymore. It's so easy to get turned around up there, because when you go up in there's like this constant fog that sets in, and it's there all winter. It almost never lifts, and so when you're up there, you can't see the sun. There's no way for you to get a bearing up there. So the very minute you get turned around up there, it's pretty much over. You're pretty much screwed. But I usually at least have a small pack that I'll put some water in there. I keep my compass in there. Of course, I do that because I keep things like the GoPro and extra batteries in it and stuff like that. But also, one good thing to take is I still have my old Army issue rain poncho, and those are pretty good because they're big and they have grommets, and you can make a little tent out of it and stuff like that if need be. But yeah, I think probably the most important, or probably the most used tool that I use when I go up there is a rain jacket.
I think that's great stuff to have in your bag for sure. The Garmin thing you called out, is that like a personal locator beacon type thing?
Well, those are actually what you're talking about. Those I've never had one of those, but I would definitely recommend one of those. In fact, I'm going to get one myself. I should have gotten one before. But the Garmin that I'm talking about is the Garmin E-Trax. It's like a GPS for backpackers.
Got it.
And they're small. They'll fit right in the palm of your hand, and you can get clips for them. You can clip them like on your shirt. I always keep mine clipped just on the shoulder strap of my pack, or my day pack. But see, the thing is a lot of those places up there in Gifford Pinchot, there's no self-service up there. So if you get in trouble, you can't call anybody, and that's another problem that those two hikers had up there. The two guys up there on Christmas Eve, was there's no cell service up there, so they couldn't call anybody. When they got turned around, they got into trouble. But those beacons, that what you're talking about, I'm not even sure what they're called offhand, but I've had several people tell me, yeah, you should get one of those. And I think that would be a good idea to get, because those go through the satellites. Those can contact the satellite.
Sure. Yeah. I've heard a lot of other researchers recommend people check them out. So I would say, yeah. I mean, if I was out there, I definitely would be all about that. I do want to say our thoughts are with the families of the two researchers that did pass away. It's very, very tough situation. Even though we don't know who they are, it still remains that two people did pass away, and our thoughts are with those families. You talked about an Army issued compass. Has there ever been any places that you're out in the forest and you've been looking at your compass and you've noticed that maybe it starts acting weird or it starts just spinning around in circles?
Yeah, not really anywhere around here. I've had that happen. I've had it happen in Iraq. I've had it happen out in the desert in places like Saudi Arabia.
Oh wow!
I have had some areas where you'd be going one way and then it would change. It would switch. Yeah, but I haven't really had that here too much. But at the same time, I don't really use it much around up here. So I just keep it with me in case the Garmin craps out, which pretty much never happens because I always keep spare batteries and things like that.
Sure.
But I would expect for something though. I mean, if it happened, especially up at Mount St. Helens or in the Gifford Pinchot for that matter, I would not be surprised if that were to happen, because I swear every time I go up there, something weird happens.
Oh yeah, I mean the stories you hear come out of that place, and also out of further south into the east, the Columbia River Gorge. The whole area up there is weird. I mean, the Willamette National Forest by itself is weird. I haven't even gotten to north where you guys are yet, but it's just some wild stuff. Talking about down there, when you've gone down there with the individuals down that group, have you had anything weird happen down around the Sweet Home area?
Well, the only time that I spent down, we camped down there when I first met them, and we camped down there for the weekend. But there wasn't really anything that really happened when we were camping down there. But they have kind of a lot of their own stories themselves. Seems to be a lot of activity down there. And of course, Michelle could probably, from the Sweet Home group, could probably elaborate more on it. But I haven't really researched much other than just camping down there that one time. And of course, we had a few like picnics down there, events where we all got together and stuff. But we didn't go squatching down there. But there are several members in that group that have come up with some pretty interesting stuff.
Absolutely.
Down there. But the Gifford Pinchot, this area that I work, it's one of the reasons that I tend to stick to this area, is just because of all the weird stuff. In fact, just last weekend, I was up there on a trail, and my GoPro kept dying. And I thought, what the heck? And I was looking at it, and the battery wasn't low. I still had probably 60%. And it died about 3 times. So I stopped, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just change batteries anyhow, because I couldn't figure out why it was dying. So as I'm looking at this, I saw what looked like there was another hiker coming up that trail. And they were probably maybe 50, 60 yards down the trail. And I didn't think too much of it at the time, so I stopped, and I was just kind of thinking in the back of my mind, by the time I get this battery switched, this hiker will be up there, and I'll ask him to see if they saw any of the gifting stations. So I changed my battery out in my GoPro quick, which takes 10 seconds, and the hiker was gone.
Oh.
And so I thought, well, that was kind of weird. I would swear that I saw a hiker there. And so I walked down the trail, looked, and there was mud. It was plenty of mud on the trail. There was no tracks. So I hiked back up the trail, and I never found a hiker. So when I got back to the truck, I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll go out to the road, go up and down the road a little bit and see where they parked. Because, I mean, it was cold and raining, and there was still some snow flying. And, I mean, obviously they would have parked somewhere nearby, but they never found a vehicle. Never found a hiker, never found a vehicle. That was just last weekend.
That's,
yeah, I mean, it's just
that's weird.
Every time, I swear, every time I go up there, there's always something weird. And there's always something weird going on up there, man. It's the weirdest place I've ever been. Yeah.
So, it sounds like you haven't had a visual yet. Like myself, I haven't had one either. But from what you know so far, what is your viewpoint of what Sasquatch is, if you have one, I guess?
Well, yeah, it's just like you just said. I've never actually had a visual. I mean, everything that I've encountered just seems to be circumstantial. It's like, it's just like that stuff with the sticks flying. I mean, when you look at all the creatures that live in the Gifford Pinchot, none of them break limbs and throw them around. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, so my outlook is that it's kind of funny because when somebody says, "Oh, you believe in Bigfoot," and what I always say is that for me it's not really a matter of belief, because it's like, it's, you believe it or if you don't. You believe in leprechauns or Santa or you don't. It's not a matter of belief for me. I had a chemistry teacher one time that put it eloquently, and he said that you can't prove stuff. He said all the knowledge that we have is really a matter of probability. It's how sure you are of something that's going to happen, or if something is or something isn't. And for me, it's kind of like, I think it's kind of that. It's about on that same lines. I mean, to me, it's more of probability. Do things like do cryptids like Sasquatch exist? And even if I believed that the probability was low, it's still enough for me to justify spending the time and the money on it that I do. I mean, really, if you think about all the thousands and thousands of sightings and stories that have come to light over centuries, it really only takes one of those to be true, and it's true. So that's pretty much my outlook on it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that, because I mean, for me, every day it's another 5 to 10 emails of people that just had a sighting that day, or they're 70 years old and they're like, "Hey, I don't care anymore. Here's what happened." And it's all over the country. It's like, man, we're just going to keep rolling the dice, and somewhere, someday, someone is going to get like the next Patterson Gimlin film. Although with AI, I don't think that would do it anymore. Unfortunately, I mean, AI is just getting too crazy. Especially with the video side of things. I would hope that, we'd still would get an amazing real video someday. But yeah, I mean, doing this podcast for a few years and realizing slowly how big places like Gifford Pinchot National Forest are. I mean, it's massive. It's like St. Helens to Adams, and then like, I mean, even up near Rainier, right? Kind of to the east of Rainier or south of that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize just how big this is. And you don't have thousands of Bigfoot researchers going out there, but you still have enough things happening so that if a few Bigfoot researchers go out there, they're still having interactions, which to me is just incredible and tells me, hey, there's stuff going on in this area and in many other areas out there too. But Steve, it has been just a privilege to have you on the show and to chat about what you're doing out there in the southern part of Gifford Pinchot. Definitely keep us in the loop. If you have anything else to share besides your YouTube channel, or if there's a way for people to reach out to you, feel free to share that at this time.
Okay, well, I do have an Instagram, Steve Searches. I don't really use it very much. I use, for the most part, I have a Facebook page, Steve Searches, and a YouTube channel, Steve Searches, and those are really the tools that I use the most. So that would be the best way to see what I'm up to and what kind of trouble I'm getting into, and best way to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. And I'll have your YouTube channel linked in the show notes. People can go check that out, subscribe, and he puts out some good stuff over there. But thanks again for coming on the show, Steve.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah, hey, thanks a lot. Thank you for having me on.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.